Welcome back to Night Flight. Today I have Alex Ansary with me. He is the founder of Out of the Box TV, otbtv.net. And the subtitle is The Path to the Greatest Truth Lies Within. And I couldn't agree more. So, Alex, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sure thing. And Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself and what sparked your interest in solar cycles?
See, right now I live off the grid and I'm from Portland, Oregon. So there's been a lot of research and experience talking to different people living in different areas and reasons why I chose to move on from living in a dense population center, concerns that I have about the future as well, and changes that I believe that the sun is going to continue to bring our world. What I noticed in my own life was major changes, personal changes during changes in the sun, from a solar minimum, for example, into a solar maxima. For example, the late 1990s leading into the 2000s, I went through a lot of personal change. And it would be in that period in which I took a more active interest in the alternative media, specifically Access Television in Portland, Oregon. But at that time, the solar cycles wasn't on my mind. It was just the changes that was going on in my life moving forward. It would be around 2009 in which I saw a more direct correlation. And as I began to investigate various topics, various manufactured events, things of that nature, including the event that led to these wars, I began to see the peak of the solar cycle as something that was constantly present. And in more recent years, I've been looking at the paranormal aspect of the solar cycles. And so we are moving into a time now, solar cycle 25, as we come out of this deep solar minimum, in which I think that we're going to see a lot of great change. And that some of the manufactured events that are on the back burner, events such as World War III, they have the potential. I'm not going to make a full-on prediction, but there is the potential of certain manufactured events making themselves more apparent and known, moving to the next level. And we're seeing signs of that now. We're in a period in which we're also seeing a record number of cosmic rays, as we see the least amount of sunspots in a deep solar minimum. And so we're seeing the social behavioral effect of, I would say, both sides of the solar cycle. And I find this to be interesting because people take an interest in psychology. People take an interest in astrology, but there's actually a number of studies that have been done on an increase in violent crimes during geomagnetic storms, also an increase in suicides around new moons. And so in the last several decades, science has been making certain leaps that can help it really understand human psychology and human trends on a much deeper level. Unfortunately, most people, even in the conspiratorial research community, overlook the influence of the solar cycles. And so my concern is knowledge can be used against an unknowing population. And so the dark occult that seems to be running things on this planet appear to be using the solar cycles against the human population. And that's one of the main things that I'm trying to bring awareness to.
Okay, thank you for that. So when you say solar cycle, not everybody might be so versed in it. What is a solar cycle?
Well, they started counting solar cycles in the West during the time of Galileo. And so we're moving into solar cycle 25. We have sunspots that indicate a particular polarity, magnetic polarity. So right now, for example, we could see reports from spaceweather.com that we're seeing various sunspots emerging with different magnetic polarities. We're essentially in between solar cycles. And so when we start to see more sunspots of a particular magnetic polarity, this is more of a sign that we're moving incrementally into sunspot cycle 25. But overall, there are concerns that we're moving into a period of less solar activity. So that's where people have been warning about the grand solar minimum and the consequences of, which is an increase in cosmic rays And with that, there is an increase in certain cataclysms, natural disasters, failures of crops, other systematic strikes to our civilization. So there's a lot of concern right now regarding that. So there's many different perspectives on the solar cycle influence, but the solar cycle peak is described as a period in which there's the most amount of sunspots. And so the peak of sunspot cycle 25 is predicted to occur around 2025. So right now we're looking at about a 6-year difference. Right now we're in the deep minimum, the bottoming out period, and the most amount of cosmic rays are entering into our world. And so there's a number of places where people can learn about the sun, and there's new scientific discoveries coming out all the time about what drives the sun. There's also a lot of potential disinformation that's out there regarding the sun as well. And a lot of pressure, if you will, to follow certain trends, you know, whether it be flat earth or something like that, just because it may be popular and trending and supported by an algorithm. And so I'm an independent mind who's not someone with a political agenda. And so that independent mind is going to express itself in a number of different ways. So what I've been looking for is to uncover the rocks, right, where people aren't necessarily looking. And that isn't the same thing as saying that I'm here to debunk other people's research, you know, that are in one area of research or another, but to simply shine the light on things that people may not be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. Because of the solar minimum, some people, yeah, then their research, they're all indicating we are heading into a new ice age. Would you agree with that?
It's possible. So certain things are possible, but I don't have a crystal ball whether or not we're going to go in that direction or not. I know that it's getting colder now. We're getting snow earlier than we normally get. We're seeing major weather changes going on around the world. So there are signs that we could be going into a period, extended period of less solar activity. One of the things that I've been looking at, however, is how we're affected by the sun itself. So even with a cycle that's becoming less active, we could still be affected by the sun when we have those geomagnetic storms, because some say there's a causal factor between the weakening Earth's magnetic field and the weakening solar cycle, so that as the solar cycle gets weaker, more solar radiation, other things are making its way through the veil. So we could be more susceptible to these solar shocks and solar waves. And so I think that's what's happening now. We actually are doing this video now after we had well over a day's worth of geomagnetic activity. And so those are periods in which we may notice, you know, changes in our dream state, changes in our consciousness, maybe even visions. So this is the interesting element of the solar effect on human consciousness that I'm attracted to. But we could be experiencing more of these solar blasts as we go through this thinning of the Earth's magnetic field as the solar cycle weakens. And so we could be becoming more aware of a variety of things as our world is changing around us, because we are affected by these very things. Our consciousness may be going through shifts as there's a variety of storms that are occurring on our planet. I don't think that technology is controlling everything, but I don't discount it. And so there are these massive cosmic changes that are taking place that are also changing us. Maybe even the passing of these near-Earth asteroids could be impacting our own consciousness to some degree or another. So it is possible, because I just want to be brief. There is a world that we live in which we're not really victims, that we were born for a reason during these times of planetary chaos. And so I'm not being political when I say that the powers that be have led the masses astray in a lot of different wicked directions, have used the militaries for a variety of purposes, including removing a lot of people off the planet in a short amount of time. So I'm not emotionally involved here, if you will, in praying for this system to hold up forever. It's beyond my control. That would include like a number of different processes that allows for civilization to flourish. It's been led in a particular direction. I think that we're alive to share information that can lead it back to the light, but we may truly be living towards times whether it's an ice age or another major event that changes our world as we know it. So whether it be through one event or going in one direction or a number, we could be experiencing a number of events that change our world as we know it. But in the end, we're heading towards something. So we could see, for example, a major power outage coming from one event or another, and then a sequence of events that may lead to an ice age. Would the ice age perhaps happen first before other events? We probably would experience other disruptions first, and I think we are now. We're seeing right now a lot of disturbing signs and drops in the temperature. We're seeing a misdirect from the sun's impact on climate in the mainstream media. So we're not even getting true education about the solar impact over climate. So we're already in a world of disinformation that isn't going to change anytime soon. I am convinced in our lifetimes we're going to experience potentially some major event, however, whether it be one or another.
Yeah. So today I read the following headline. Unrest in France, Spain, Algeria, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, Hong Kong, Venezuela, Chile, Ecuador, and Bolivia. Do you see a connection?
I see a connection, and I could be using this time to track quite a bit of events in real time. A number of people can that find this subject to be interesting. I saw a couple of stories that got my attention once I also could see that there was increased geomagnetic activity. You know, I look for the stories you don't see every day, things that make you go, like one story, a woman drove her vehicle, her RV, into a casino in Las Vegas, right as we were in the red on the planetary K index. So in the lower right-hand side of spaceweather.gov, it's showing that in real time. And then I see over in Russia, somebody may be involved with military, was involved in some sort of mass shooting or breakdown. And there were other couple of breakdown stories as well. So there may be like a pattern to certain things. When I first started looking at the solar impact while living in the city in Portland, I'd be looking at the planetary K index when we were coming out of the quiet part of the cycle, when it was becoming more active in 2010. And I was noticing more drive-by shootings and stories of gang violence, and noticing a direct correlation with that. And, you know, this is something that people can look at on their own. Some people are going to be more sensitive than others. Some people just need to be educated, and they might become more aware of why they're suffering from certain types of insomnia, certain types of dreams, even lucid dream states. So this is not something that exclusively causes all people to become violent at the same time. Rather, some people may have a breakdown and go off in a particular direction. Others, they may have a breakthrough in consciousness. One of the ways in which I'll feel the effect, to be more specific, is a strong need to take a nap, like as the geomagnetic activity is taking place. And then kind of a resurge of energy when the geomagnetic storm is over. There may be also other subtle influences based on where we are on the planet. So like the West Coast, for example, is near the zero contour lines. And according to an article by Greg Braden called The Shift Is Here, there's some really good articulation of his thoughts on how there's so much change going on the West Coast due to this massive change in magnetism. Certain areas, you can even think of them as acupuncture points. And so other places, other than high energy places instead where the energy is more stagnant, we may see less change, say places like Middle America, certain places, you know, in the heartland. So I think there's a high and a low to different places at different times because of the magnetism. Certain people may be having a deep spiritual experience or transformation in the same region where some people are experiencing extreme drug addiction and other types of violence. Ultimately, the powers that be seem to have some sort of deep knowledge of human physiology, you know, how to push people's buttons, how to get the masses to act in a particular direction. And now that they truly have control over these tech giant industries, Facebook, YouTube, on and on and on, right? They have a certain power that tyrants in the past could only dream of. So I think that we are heading towards controlled events and chaos, to where they are actually pinpointing the exact day and period or period in time in which they want people to respond the most emotionally, using social media and technology to engage in mind control. So if people learn about these things and start waking up and starting to study history, and if they know that there was a period of manufactured events on the timeline, and they learn the solar human emotional connection, the people can start waking up to what's going on here, that they're leading us in a particular direction, that all this divide and conquer, illusions of separation, propaganda that has polluted the internet is actually there on purpose, building and building and building. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to fall for it. But with the algorithm working against the actual truth that is out there and promoting disinformation, there is a war seemingly for people's minds in a real literal way. I think that what we're involved in here is trying to awaken people to these deceptions that come from a more dark spiritual place. One could even say archonic, than blaming. I'm not blaming anyone in office, nor saying anyone's name, because we're not really dealing with humans behind this conspiracy in the end. We are living in this petri dish reality, and there is some sort of a blueprint to the takeover of humanity that these archonic entities may be working with. And so I think that it's always been in their interest to really suppress the real wake up as to how they're manipulating the timelines. These are periods when we have these solar blasts in which we can have the deepest potential experiences, awakenings, expressions of our highest selves. And so by their manufactured events occurring during these high energy periods, also with new moon and full moon phases, they're trying to take us off the path of who we are. And so as we look at 5G about to be implemented in the 2020s, it's occurring at a time in which we're already going to be bombarded potentially with more of this natural electromagnetic energy. Even if we're dealing with a solar minimum or a grand solar minimum with a thinning of the veil, we're going to be more susceptible to these blasts. And so there's the potential for a lot of mental illness to occur with this 5G coming out and really maybe jamming the signal, if you will, the natural signal. So at a time in which we're supposed to be receiving this natural blast of energy, somehow the signal is being scrambled through this modern world that we're currently living in.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever looked into the subject of what determines how we react to those events, solar events, cosmic events? As you said, some people, they have a total mental, emotional breakdown, meltdown, whatever, and others, they might break through a ceiling that they had for a long time and make huge leaps in terms of spiritual development. What determines that?
Well, there are some studies that have been done on the effect of geomagnetic storms. If you're getting, if you mean in relation to actual studies, there's a number of them that have been highlighted. One by New Scientist, and I want to bring up the specifics of that. But there was a scientist that was quoted in that, Oleg Shumilov, and this is out of Russia. So they've been involved in a lot of studies on this, on the number of psychiatric admissions during geomagnetic storms, other studies on violent crime. So they've done a number of studies that I have archived over at solarmaxnews.com. So there's a number of different studies. I also have a slideshow that references some of these studies as well, and the information of Alexander Chizhevsky, and just going by memory from about 1918 onward. I'm not so sure when his studies exactly became famous or well known, but he's started to come upon his hypothesis around 1918 or 1919. And his studies eventually attracted the attention of the Russian oligarchy, and he ended up being detained and doing research in the coal mines. And so there's a lot of research about Alexander Chizhevsky that's actually still in Russian, that still needs to be translated. So there's some information that's been compiled by Burl Payne. And so People after him verified his research that in fact there is a causal connection between these international battles, specifically periods of more wars, outbreaks of wars, riots, civil unrest. And so there's a chart that's on the page that I have at solarmaxnews.com that shows the highs and the lows of these international battles. Some of the major events that have occurred in our history include 9/11, a period in which there's an increase in solar activity and a major event taking place. The Carotene event, 1859, for example, that took out the grid at that time, occurred right before major events for the Civil War, for example. Most people won't find a correlation between the outbreak of a civil war and the energy in the United States at that time, and also the Carotene event, but these things are connected. So right now we're bombarded with fearful news, although most people are not prepared, for the grid to go out. But we're bombarded with news about the potential of the grid going out as a result of a massive solar flare. People aren't necessarily aware of how some people physiologically are affected by these things. 1989, a solar flare affected the grid in a part of Canada. But at that time in 1989, the world was also in upheaval in other ways with the fall of the wall, the late 80s leading into the 90s, Desert Storm, and that particular event. So we could see a number of periods also of changes in human consciousness, even some sort of in pop culture interest in a particular type of fad or style or something, some sort of mania, some sort of madness of the mobs around some sort of thing as there's wars taking place. And so I think that we have that phenomena with solar cycles, that humans tend to get more excited, whatever their star sign, whatever their ethnicity, whatever their gender. So Alexander Chizinsky called this the Human Excitability Index. And so I don't have my notes up in front of me citing this specifically, but this is all the subject of an ebook that I have on Amazon that gets a little bit more specific into this. There are also links, I believe that there are some links, although I'm not an expert, with earth changes and an increase in earthquakes. So an area or a time period that I would suspect the next big earthquake potentially in the Pacific Northwest would be potentially this next solar cycle coming out of the minimum and going into the maximum period of solar cycle 25. So I think that based on what we've seen with past solar cycles and correlations, that even with a weakening solar cycle, that we could still see some stuff taking off, major world events. A lot of things are in position now between the United States and China, and a lot of the current trade war realities could lead to a potential outcome. Even with a grand solar minimum and crop failure, there are certain things that could happen that could trigger the power balance when a big part of the world or chunk of the world loses a lot of food. So, I mean, there's a number of different variables. And so right now I consider this to be the quiet before the storm, 2019 leading into 2020, with scientists expecting the first signs of solar cycle 25 anytime between now and 2020. Not the maximum, but a sign that we're moving into the next cycle. And so with that, we ourselves are moving also, being as we are affected by these things. And it's not just about the astrological position of planets. It is also incorporating the cycle of the sun. So I think that that is something, in addition to astrology, that most people look at that is in a big way dominant over our own personal changes.
Would you say that people who do not know who and what they are and what they stand for will be affected in a very bad way by these energies, and that they might get bulldozed in one way or another?
I think there's a lot of subliminal mind control that's already been at work to create people that will automatically respond to certain events that are manufactured, especially with control over what they're going to see on social media, especially Facebook. And a lot of this is already coming out. It's not about being political. It's about realizing that there really are special interests that have a vested interest in controlling what people see and how they react. and they've done a fair amount of tests for multiple years, testing how to manipulate people's emotions by manipulating what they see. So that is an area of concern. It's an area of concern as we go into the next solar cycle. You know, and a lot of what people call the zombie apocalypse is that's another labyrinth that I can get into long-winded, but you know, quite simply, people look at the zombie apocalypse from their point of observation. So there's also that programming. Well, what is a zombie? And then how do you deal with the zombie? And I saw warning signs of this over 10 years ago, seeing, you know, this video game reality of, well, this is how you deal with a zombie. And then, well, what do you deal with people that are just automatically marginalize something? And then what if there's a pandemic that is released? And then people are deemed zombies that are infected. So there's always been that type of psychological warfare with the interjection of the zombie apocalypse meme within our collective psyche. The true zombie apocalypse that we would be facing would be people infected by this programming that are, see, for years and years before the event that led to these wars, for example, there was a surplus in certain types of programming and a building up of a society during a time of peace, if you will, but building it up, and then releasing that aggression in one particular direction. And I think that there is an advanced way in which they use society, in which they build up society, build up its strength, and then release that strength, send it in a certain direction. And so that's basically something that we're seeing now. And, you know, there's a particular interview that I did with someone years ago, and I think there's a fair amount of clues in his dream that he had about the nation's defenses coming down and Russia and China making advances for the United States. And without getting all into that, I think there is something about what he's envisioned and the events that are taking place now. Unfortunately, a lot of people are reactive emotionally to what's taking place right now and the people that they are told are the enemy. And so there's been so much redirection towards internal chaos, and that's all been by design to weaken the country overall, so we're not really able to deal with those things in the future. And that's a big problem. And so a lot of people, you know, are clearly acting like they're part of acting in a autopilot manner. Sometimes I call it the prototype personality. And so there's a certain percentile of society that seems to be groomed to act out that almost that sleeper agent type of behavior, and it's disturbing. And so that's something in that that's advanced mind control, however it occurs. And I'm not claiming to have all the answers, but I do believe this does include the supernatural. So if we're to start to talk about social engineering of societies for super killers, I don't think that the conversation ends with the government. It's something far more sinister. And so I don't think that any of us are ever going to have all the answers to something like that. You know, but it's something that seems to be appearing. It seems that we're seeing the synchronicities in the news. People that sometimes wake up with this type of declaration that they're out to destroy everyone around them. And we're reading more of these stories of people that are seemingly snapping and acting out some sort of a program. So I think that some of these stories that we're seeing are clues, and people should be paying attention to what's happening with the sun and or the cosmic rays and or maybe other factors like near Earth asteroids, and see if we can have, deeper data to support some of these concerns of a deep correlation. So I think that's where we're at right now. We're in a period in which these concerns that we're having are manifesting as we're going through one cycle and another. And on a small level, violence aside, I've seen in my own life and experiences major changes in human behavior and perception, for better or for worse, when we go through these major changes, or things like a polar vortex, major changes with the weather. You know, people are going through something deeply profound, like they're shifting as well. Yeah. So not everybody is going to handle those shifts very well. And that is something that modern science could do a lot to catch up with the scientific reports that are out there that they have done on the causal factors. they can do more than offer people drugs that will often, in many cases, make the situation worse. So, there may be elements of our species that are choosing to evolve with knowledge as to how we're affected by these things. Modern science, modern institutions would still consider some of those very ideas mentally ill. And that's unfortunate. So, being, I guess, more spiritual rather than religious, I've come up with my own understanding, that we are in this form of biological hell, where there is a certain amount of suppression over a certain amount of information getting out. And once people actually reach a certain level of evolution, the goal is to evolve beyond this place spiritually, not to get caught up in some sort of a political trap or worse, or some other paradigm. And in fact, that's what a lot of the mainstream thought forms that are out there, including in the independent media, including the things that are most promoted by the algorithm on this platform and others. There may be some great content out there, and I recognize that, but a lot of it leads people back into that same world of ego, of materialism, of lack. It's in many cases the absolute opposite of what we really want. And so in my own personal life, I identify less with being a part of a movement that's easily defined. It's not as easily defined anymore. We've been going through our own personal tribulations and interference. And oftentimes we face interference in order to learn how to overcome and continue to speak our truth.
Yeah. Some people might think that this subject is a little bit fringe, but when we look back, the ancients, they actually understood what was going on with the solar cycles. I'm not saying they had the full picture, but that was not a fringe topic.
So it seems that there are manipulations of this knowledge also that occur throughout time, that we could see with the use of human sacrifice and things of that nature. But that's not to take away from the deeper knowledge about the sun and the life-giving nature of it. So we do see in the ancient world, especially with this pre-grid society and culture, a much deeper understanding and appreciation for this life-giving ball of light that's responsible for our life. And today we've drifted away from that basic understanding. And so I'm still going to be researching some of this stuff. There's a lot of mysteries about the sun that have yet to be revealed, about our connection to it. There still seems to be that element of hunting the empath, as you might mention, but also like hunting the person speaking about certain issues. We're still in a day and age where certain things are considered controversial, and having a deep spiritual connection to the sun seems to be one of them. So I would say this is something that free spirits have truly dealt with and faced since the beginning of time, is this dark side within this realm that wants to take us away from the true light and lead us in the direction of a lot of false lights and false creators. It's a very similar theme. Sometimes I wonder whether our souls are really just some sort of Groundhog Day, where we're reliving some of the same lifetimes over and over and over. But ultimately, the goal is to evolve beyond that type of a wheel of reality that we may be stuck in. And I think that some of the esoteric tests that are out there regarding evolving beyond the gates of this type of reality are worth revisiting. There's a reason why a lot of people are looking for answers at this time, and how to defend themselves against psychic intrusion and being misled into various directions. For example, a lot of people experience the voices in the head phenomena. Mm-hmm. And that's not something that can be strictly attributed to, in my opinion, just technology, but also these changes in the sun and other things that may change the electromagnetic field to just enough to where our perceptions are altered, to where we're experiencing more of the paranormal influence. So there may be periods in which we go through changes in energy, in which ungrounded humans become the cannon fodder of entities that are trying to use those humans for a certain purpose, ultimately to affect others, but to hijack their souls. Humans in mass that are led in certain directions are ultimately the slaves of those archonic overlords. And so the sun and the cycles that it brings seems to be a part of a natural spiritual evolution for the souls that are in this type of reality, that these solar epochs are there to help us ascend, not in the traditional New Age version of ascension, but ascending in terms of the souls evolving beyond this type of a world, in a more traditional Eastern sense of the meaning, be it Buddhist or other. And so I identify with a lot of that, especially the idea that desire keeps us in bondage and things of that nature. And so the modern manifestation of that is a lot of these modern movements are based in fear, desire, illusions of separation that are avoiding these key spiritual truths. So the ancients had a deeper understanding to these things, and it's something that a lot of us have just never been schooled in, a true rite of passage. There are certain Native American sites that were abandoned in the past that only recently they've discovered have some sort of alignment with the sun or understanding of the sun's behavior. And in our society, with our instruments, it's only been recently that certain places have even been identified to have, it's difficult to describe, but there is an article about the Mesa Verde National Site that has discovered some sort of cycles with the sun. And only recently have we discovered it. So somehow or another, the ancients were aware of this, and it played a role in where they did what they did, their particular religious ceremonies, the ways, the methods in which they connected with the gods, if you will. So there may be a deeper knowledge to this, maybe even a deeper reason why certain underground bases and facilities are near ancient Native American sites in order to potentially harness that energy.
Mm-hmm. Let's stay with the Archons for a while. Okay, here it comes. In my view, our political system is a 3D expression of the Archontic control grid. People might disagree with that. I don't care. That is how I am wired. And I'm always amazed how much energy people are still putting into, yeah, let's say, oh, we're having this election, we're having that election, as if it matters. You know, it does not matter. It's all a stage. It's all, the outcome is fixed. And if you really think that your vote gets counted, yeah, maybe you might want to think again. What say you?
Well, I agree. And yeah, I see a lot of this as something that is harvesting human energy and thought and emotion that is poured into these false choices. And so we really get a chance to, and it offends some people to hear this, but we get a chance to see those people in our world that maybe in the past used to talk about independence, independence of thought, independence of consciousness, on and on and on. Even sometimes people talking about compassion for people that are attacked by drone attacks. And I could see during certain elections and periods, people will talk about those things until in the consensus reality, it's no longer okay to talk about those things because the agenda's changed. Now the idea of what a mainstream truther is has changed dramatically to the point where it has changed many friendships, this political divide. And so to truly be outside the left-right paradigm is to be outside of being swayed that because one person is running that may be very corrupt and criminal, that does not then necessarily mean that the other person or opposite is the savior. And so a lot of these programs, these archonic programs that are working out on us, the human population, I believe it has to do with our brains. Like we're in a controlled reality, a biological hell. And so a lot of humans are going to follow certain lines of thought and logic. Don't want to get deep-winded and all the other stuff, but it's like we have a responsibility to break free from that type of conditioning and programming. And that's why we go through massive energetic changes in our world. I believe they're ultimately there to help us break free from these types of mind control programs. So periods in which, you know, we're thinking differently and we're having new ideas, and we're having new friendships, relationships. That's all part of, in some cases, evolving to being higher beings and not stuck in the old blueprints, the old programs. So there's a lot of things that can be manufactured to keep people in the old programs or the old world. You know, ultimately, the New World Order represents this conformity of thought, this military-industrial complex, and the true modern Roman Empire that, in a way, picks on a certain group and sacrifices them before the world for a certain period of time, and then moves on to a certain group. Using worldwide propaganda that I often call anti-themism, may, you know, pick out a certain group and even manufacture an immigration crisis, so that in the consensus mind of the people around the world, we'll go ahead and get rid of those people. Yeah, they're causing this crisis. No, the people that control the New World Order and these events have caused the crisis. So we're now in a morality crisis on the planet because AI is now taking over, and mainstream independent media and things of that, it's very mainstream actually in where it takes people. It's very much us versus them. It's very much like Bush said in the 2000s, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. Now it's like you're either with us or you're with the left or with this group. And they've made it that way. There is a place for the true independent who's not a part of any group to just speak their mind and their experiences, live in this type of a system. And so it's the responsibility of the people to break free from that, but a lot of people will not. And so karmically, we're all responsible for our actions. You know, the universe is busy at work sending us synchronistic clues, probably in our own lives, telling us when we're not on the right path. It's happened in my own life. And when I got on the path of speaking my truth, you know, during my own previous dark ages within this lifetime, I saw how certain things changed. And I began to interview various people and speak about various things when I got on the right path. So a lot of people in this world can be on the right path of freeing themselves from the Archons and then be duped right back through it by not freeing themselves from their own biological impulses. So there's things that are going to be programmed into us, certain angers, certain lusts, certain things that are tribal, that are left over that we don't necessarily want to reactivate. But there are certain forces and entities in this world that will act in a certain way to reactivate that which should not be reactivated. So not all things that may seem natural that's within our bloodlines and within our bodies, we should just let out the door. We're in a physical form that is imperfect in a world that's been heavily manipulated by the Archons. So I believe that we want to evolve beyond the world of physical flesh. That's the true ascension, not the typical, you know, New Age one where the spacecrafts come and save us. And it wasn't by accident that that meme has polluted the world in such a great extent. And so this is a period in which we are experiencing the element of the dark ages in this grand solar minimum, as some might call it, where certain elements of the illusions of separation program are working on some people where 10 years ago they may have been above it. And so people need to be aware of this, that there's a deeper war on consciousness that's taking place within our own movements, within our own groups. And, you know, this illusions of separation program will tell each group that it's being victimized by a certain ethnicity. And to succumb to that type of programming is to continue to be a slave to the system. So even if somebody is waking up that some people are becoming zombies, not or something, that doesn't mean that everybody is. Everybody on this planet bears some responsibility for what's going on to a certain degree. We're all going to be tasked with our own unique challenges. You can have two siblings from the same family and they will go in different directions vibrationally. And so people will never work their way outside of the matrix by thinking, oh, we've got it figured out now. All our world's problems are just these people. And so my hypothesis is we've been in this ancient system of human sacrifice that rotates who it's targeting. And so there's enough information on this planet now for people to wake up to where the jig is up, that we're realizing that we're in a simulation that is engaged in this practice. And it's entrapping the human souls that become a part of it. And so there are humans now that are a part of this demonization blueprint. And then there are those that are silent about it or participating in it in some other way, because of the way that the Archons can manipulate technology to benefit certain people. And so it's like selling your soul to the devil. But in this case, we're talking about the Archons. Because of what's controlled through technology, certain things that may be considered good luck may befall certain people that are slaves to certain groups, to keep it broad and general. And so if somebody has a pretty good grasp of the things that I'm talking about, that there is a light side and a dark side, they can almost put on the glasses like they live and almost see team A, team B, team red, team blue, where certain souls and speakers may keep a certain distance away from certain people that are vibrating at a certain tone, or trying to, take their propaganda and make it look like what woke is, or the truth, or ascending. So there's a lot of buzzwords that are now out there and popular. And groupthink is not the thing that's going to help us ascend from this physical world beyond this type of reincarnation time wheel. It's evolving beyond the specific things that we came here to evolve beyond. So I'm going to have certain things that only now Ansary is particularly tasked with. And that may include speaking about certain things that I'm becoming aware of, even if those ideas are mocked. That's not necessarily somebody else's karma. And so we are here, though, for a reason. I don't think that anything is an accident. And so this Archonic machine will try to mirror our own thoughts, as others have said, to redirect our attempt to evolve ourselves. For example, there could be ways in which the Archonic matrix tries to tempt the truth speaker to go in a certain direction, or to change their speech to promote a certain meme, to report a certain type of news, even if it's not necessarily true. And we've seen certain examples of this in the world in the last couple of years, to where just talking about certain things and joining the group mind does a lot to improve one's algorithm or reach. So I think that people need to rise above the peer pressure to change our behaviors too much to serve the machine. A little goes a long way. People that want to be successful on YouTube, there's certain rules of thumb, certain things that you don't talk about, and also being very regular with your uploads. Well, what if someone is not maintaining their spiritual side? Or what if someone might feel compelled to talk about something just for the interest of gaining more viewers? YouTube is a big thing now, and YouTube does not always do what it could do to draw people of a more spiritual inclination to my work. Oftentimes it's people that are still in the political dichotomy. And so oftentimes YouTube can be a little bit of a practical joker in how it kind of interferes with the engagement process. So it's important as we go deeper into somewhat of a transhumanistic world already, where our relationships are often over screens like this. It's important that people realize that machines should not be dictating the people that we are necessarily connected to, or listening to, or engaged with. And there's a way in which the algorithm in multiple ways eventually starts doing that, and gathering too much information about our psychologies and our relationships with friends and family. With Gmail, for example, transcribing automatic responses in between exchanges, it's suggesting ways of responding to a conversation that one would think would be, somewhat private. And so in the end, people are going to have to take their minds back from the machine's interference in how humans engage with each other, and that's not easily done, but it's something that is part of the solution to maintaining our humanity, as we move forward, and using the technology now for the highest good, while at the same time pulling back potentially from Facebook and certain specific websites that have violated trust and privacy. It's important to use our access to the internet for the highest good while there is still some time. But ultimately, we've seen the end result of the internet replacing our relationships. And it's mostly something that sabotages a lot of people. And so having both feet deeply entrenched in the internet world is more or less something that they've duped us into. It's a big step on the way to transhumanism and virtual reality. It's something that a lot of people now that talk about, transhumanism and the beast and implants, they may not fully understand how their thoughts may have been implanted through a controlled social media feed. So in many ways, there's ways for us to look at ourselves in the mirror, because it's about personal evolution, freeing ourselves from a deep soul enslavement to this type of a world.
Mm. I agree with you. There is a huge push to polarize everybody. You know what I mean? And especially since Trump came in. I'm not a Trumper. I don't have a horse or a dog in that race. I'm a political atheist. So, but we have that QAnon phenomenon. We have people who understood for years that the left-right paradigm is total nonsense, and there is no such thing as an independent candidate that could be your savior. All of a sudden, all of this is popular again. That's really amazing.
Yeah, that was what I was hitting at earlier, and it's a frustrating time, because certain periods people are going to be more receptive to certain truths. Other periods, because of the propaganda, they will be less perceptive.
Mm.
There may be some sort of implant that, if you hear certain thoughts or independent views, that it's the political enemy. That's what we have here in this situation. And so, the algorithm will promote the political left, right, back and forth, as long as it's, kind of kept inside that box. But we'll notice that it's not really an independent perspective coming from any of those networks. It's the same thing. It's like a well-coordinated battle between the networks of CNN, Fox, MSNBC, whereas to the people, it seems like totally opposite views and totally opposite perspectives, and it's happening all over again. So what's the current thing? They want everyone focused on impeachment, even though for years we've seen the failure of such attempts to do so. So even if somebody is not going along with a certain political ideology, that doesn't mean that they can stay away from that type of groupthink of impeachment that oftentimes is just there to pull in people's emotion. So much of this is controlled now. The other thing is, people talk about civil war, whereas it's a lot of people that are not part of militias, but independent thinkers and bloggers. Civil war does not really account for situations where people are singled out and attacked for their beliefs or their reporting. And so there's a lot of people that have been groomed for a certain scenario that I've even been talking about for a number of years, and I've seen how sharing certain views are highly controversial. But they definitely are grooming through this blueprint that's not just used in our nation, but is used around the world, to where certain periods, a lot of focused aggression and propaganda is released, maybe during a certain date where it seems like everyone is programmed and groomed for some sort of event. And I'm noticing a disturbing trend in our own nation that's going in something that's almost akin to a Philip K. Dick novel, like The Man in the High Castle, or other novels by Philip K. Dick, the science fiction writer. So I think that a lot of people are turning away from their deeper concerns in this nation. A lot of people don't want to speak out about the things that they should, because they see what happens to others. I see how there is a big need for people to stand up outside of the political divide and speak their mind. And this is a day and age where we're seeing the light side and the dark side of how the internet is expressing itself. And so, people have talked in the past about certain types of outcomes, conspiracy end games. They've skipped certain scenarios, and they've gone for things that were a little bit more Hollywood or appearance, not to mention Hollywood itself and certain figures in the alternative media pouring the gasoline on certain theories as to how it would go down. So what happens in the end is the cry wolf syndrome, where a lot of people, after a certain period of time, they drop out, they tune out from being aware of what's going on, and they become nihilists in their own ways, or converts to something else in their own way. And I think there's danger in just turning away then from being aware. To really know what's going on, it's not about who to trust 100% on the internet. It's about learning how to read the news for oneself. and also the changes in the cycle, like the solar cycle, as we discussed. So when they're aware how most people are going to be affected by these things, and they do the research in that, it can be easy to see how some people are going to be responding and acting. Going now to something else.
Oh, okay.
What would you like?
You finished your thought. Okay. Yeah, a lot of that
Well, I can
is
add some more to that thought, but
what?
I can add some more to that thought, just with a follow-up question.
Yeah. I think a lot of those events are staged for our thoughts and especially emotions. That is what charges it. You know what I mean? Because if
Let me add this to what we're discussing with the political thing. I mean, I think that there is enhanced subliminal influence in what we're dealing with. That is something that I probably didn't get into in the last part. There's a lot of subliminal influence, power of suggestion happening just from technology, whether it's supernatural or something else. And so there is a lot of that is powering a lot of this, more so than I've ever seen with previous administrations. And so that's ultimately one of the things that's been a big influence with a lot of people.
Yeah. So let us go back.
No, it's okay. I'm sure there's plenty of editing to do in this one.
I don't think
Because
so.
there's certain parts where I summarized my point pretty quickly and then just kind of went on and on and on. So there could be some editing in this one.
No, I don't think so. I like little flaws. I don't like it if it's too polished. So
sometimes I'll just go on and on the same idea, but the political divide now is manufactured to lead to a more dangerous scenario. I used to talk about this all the time on my YouTube channel, and it's a little too concerning, but we're heading towards something that's splitting us entirely within this nation. It's a very deep psyops. I don't know if we're ever going to recover from it, but everything that's happening now is deliberate on a timeline.
Yeah.
And the types of events that are being manufactured, this type of us versus them, and a very similar aggression on both the mainstream left and right. The type of finger pointing, it creates a very adverse climate for those that are outside of that political energy.
Yeah.
You know, it's traveling throughout America shows that a lot of these areas are dominated by one or the other, also politically. You know, mainstream Democrat ideology or Republican without like a thriving third option or another type of psychology. I mean, so obviously that's what people need. People obviously have been trying to create their own independent communities for many, many years, but that requires responsibility. We're not really taught how to work with each other within the society to live outside of these Archonic controlled realities. It's a very difficult thing to kind of implement, but we all kind of want it. But there's things to work towards with regards to that. You know, what it would take to live in societies without, you know, all of these controlling mechanisms. Ultimately, learn dependency on the grid itself. And that is ultimately sabotage. If they know that something's coming to the grid to disrupt things and people aren't prepared to live a different way or to communicate with their neighbors, you know, then one could look back on this period that we're in now and see it as a period in which there was purposeful sabotage to get people divided, very distrustful. And that is not where we want to be in a period in which we're dealing with near-Earth asteroids, stories about long-term power outages, you know, things of that nature. It's a time to rekindle our own spiritual side of ourselves. Things like forgiveness and prayer and meditation, going beyond our ego attachment even to this material plane. You know, without going too far into those areas, as things get worse physically and socially, we should be even more involved in our own spiritual journey, which doesn't include fame and fortune and what other people think, but really understanding, you know, why we were born during this time. You know, we're in between worlds of being completely put into this Borg-like reality, but still having, like, you know, some flexibility to share our ideas with the whole world. While this technology does exist, it's in a way a magical time period, where if enough people were to change their vibration and their thinking, that we can change a lot of our immediate reality, cities, environments.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I don't think that we're going to see that massive change. It's really about waking up to what we're doing in this type of simulation. You know, we can put out information that can help others, but I'm not in a state of mind that some sort of massive shift or wave is coming that's going to make everyone super loving and enlightened and empathetic. If anything, I'm talking about shifts in energy that sometimes drive people towards the opposite, you know, and how we need to be able to yield these energies, you know, and shift with them without being taken over by unseen forces.
Yeah. Alex, let's take a little break. So we are back. And Alex, what do you think? You touched on it already a little bit, that solar cycles are being used against us, but I would like to comprehend a little bit better how that is being done.
Okay. Well, we talked a little bit about technology being used in the manufacture of certain events. So if you look at 9/11, for example, there's some studies that have looked at changes in the Earth's magnetic field around the time of those particular events. And so there may be a correlation between thoughts, collective thought patterns, and things of that nature during times of chaos in which people are swept up in a particular type of emotion. And so the understanding of this potential collective synchronization of thought can be weaponized as people are swept up in particular types of emotions and then thus led to war. Maybe even in other ways, their energy is harvested. If they're caught up in a massive war or reactionary energy or other types of witch hunts, domestic or otherwise, that's a lot of negative energy. And so it seems that there may be a plan. It may already be in place. I believe that it is, that they already are coordinating these worldwide televised events and social media things with certain parts of the cycle, periods in which people are more emotional. Now, this includes full moons and new moons. And a lot of this goes beyond my level of education with regards to astrology. I've never studied astrology. So people with a much more advanced understanding of this, our research complements each other. It all has room for growth, where it all kind of meets at a certain center. So there's certain times in which we are more capable and even physically stronger than other periods. Like, for example, there may be a link with more testosterone in males, for example, during periods of increased geomagnetic activity. There's other changes to the circadian rhythm. There's a long list of various studies that have been discovered. And then there's the studies or the correlations where we can see the world events that transpired. Again, the riots, the wars, also social movements that may not be violent, but may just be a movement of people. The late 60s, for example, has that energy of major changes in the solar cycle. Also, there was a report I read about a massive solar cycle or sunspot recorded in 1972. Well, there's a lot of spiritual interest coming out of the 70s and the early 70s, like 1972, and things around that period. So I will personally notice a correlation between spiritual insights synchronized in the population and a sharp increase in solar activity. And this is something that the Assyrians may have been looking at also 2,700 years ago, is a correlation between solar activity and changes in society. So what I'm looking at isn't something that's unique to me. It's kind of just more unique for our current day and age. But that's kind of the predominant direction I look at above the other things, and why we're going to see a lot of disturbance after 2020, more so 2021. And so spiritually, this is something that, trying to find the right words, activates our energies in a lot of different ways, these high solar periods. And so I'm trying to think, where else do you want me to go with that one?
Okay, during a solar minimum, would you say that people are more apathetic? And if so, how can you get the people riled up?
So there is a link between more apathy, in my opinion, observations, less protests, less reactionary behavior, just overall less tensions. And there's ways in which that can be used also against the population by the people in control that are trying to move forward certain agendas. But there may be, according to other reports I've come across, like government studies on periods in which remote viewing has been more accurate. For example, they have the Stargate program, and according to one link that I found in posts at Solar Max News, they may have found a link between less solar activity or solar minimum and people being more intuitive or psychic. And so to answer the question about riling people up, people are going to be, another way of looking at it, waking people up or informing people about certain things in the quiet before the storm. People may be receptive to certain ideas when they're less busy, when their minds are less busy and activated and less emotional. And so by being less emotional, more introspective, maybe in that stillness, there could be more receptiveness to that truth within them. And so I think that's the key there, in that certain ideas may blossom best in certain periods. There's a time and a place for certain concepts to be shared. Even when I look at my own history of activism and speaking, there's certain things I'm talking about more for a couple of years, and then things may go more into a certain direction. And a lot of things are my observations. Okay, so when we talk about how the elite use the solar cycles, that's still an essay that's evolving over time. But it again is the manipulation of real world events and media, specifically media in today's day and age, to change consciousness immediately to where their heightened energy goes in a different direction instead of something more spiritual. It's rerouted essentially. It's modern day mind control powered by instantaneous messaging. See, we didn't have this type of grid in the past that's so controlled by artificial intelligence. So to me, it is avoiding the black magic of today's day and age and sorcery of having an impact on our soul, of being able to hijack who we are. And right now, it is mostly a totally unknowing society that these things are going on. So I actually don't know at all how to necessarily wake the people up. I'm saying in general, I've seen some very negative signs in the collective in recent years. If anything, maybe there was more hope years ago. I see signs of people under great influence from things they don't even understand. And to me, in the end, that's the way this world has been for a long, long time. And so there is a purpose in informing people, but if we become too attached to the outcome, which is a better way to say it, to the point, then we can remain in a miserable, tortured soul state. This world is potentially going to stay in a certain level of control, whether we like it or not. But we have to find some sort of meaning behind why we're becoming aware, because other people look at this world of control and they say, well, you're not going to change it. So why would you try to spread this information unless you're a troublemaker? And many of the programs that are default within this matrix come out of people. It's that interference, that archonic interference. And I've experienced it my entire life. The type of energy backlash to who I am, the things that I'm saying, maybe even the potential that I have to help other people. And in the end, we have to come to terms with this interference and realize that it is being allowed by the Creator to ultimately help us rise above our own egos in this material plane. We ultimately are on a planet that is a history of the truth speaker being persecuted before the masses and worse. And so we have to come to terms with this. What are we really invested in? Our soul, or some sort of McMansion, or some sort of brand? And the brand entrapment of social media has entrapped many souls. So we're dealing with the technology now that can create this type of artificial reality for a lot of people that's really been dropped at the doorstep of people across the planet the last 10 years. There's a big soul entrapment to the internet personality type of a thing. And again, the compromise comes in where people make make a micro religion out of their political beliefs. And they then seek to oppress other people with those beliefs under the guise of saying, you're either with us or you are automatically with our political opposition. So that type of thinking is unconscious thinking. And so it's like an energy signature. You can see it 10 miles away, this type of energy signature. You're with us or you're with them. And so a lot of this stuff, we can't get into all in one show, but these are pretty fundamental concepts. You know, they're pretty fundamental things that I think are concrete with having a true, genuine consciousness shift or evolution beyond the prototype personality. And then there's the cookie cutter, modern, commercialized new age version. We're always going to be potentially contending with also disinformation that tells us, don't warn the people, you'll just make it happen, or don't talk about potential scenarios. And this is something that seems to be a default psychological defense mechanism within the society. You know, there is something about our thoughts being powerful, but the way that the law of attraction has been received by a lot of people, perceived, and used is often done in a selfish way. And so what I'm here to say is those very people can also be taking their own beliefs that they can change the world forever and have anything and make the world a better place and not necessarily make it about personal gratification. I've yet to see a worldwide movement of people truly applying their consciousness to ending these wars and related things. Especially, I haven't seen it attempted outside of politics or perpetuating the idea that some political change is going to bring us that type of peace. And there is so much room for improvement now for humanity to try to make those attempts to vibrationally shift into something that is not waiting for this political system to metamorphosize for us. Instead, I see a world that's heading in a certain direction, and if anything, a massive solar flare that disrupts worldwide technology would be more of a reset event, to end it on that note, a reset event that would change relationships immediately and the way that people receive their information and are communicating with the world. Whether we like it or not, we would be thrust back into the Stone Age in the sense of having to talk to one another. And that would also be really frightening too, in the aftermath of so much propaganda. You know, I think that we would see a lot of conflict, unfortunately. My hope is, though, that consciousness of humanity would be better than that and would be able to work out its own problems without constantly being deceived. That hopefully there could be a critical mass in that type of a situation. So, you know, critical mass is an important thing to talk about. But what would a real critical mass look like other than something that's just lip service? So we've been receiving this lip service for years about the collective shift in consciousness. And I don't really think that we've seen it in the end, now that I've been experiencing these different prophecies of the collective shift in consciousness for over 20 years. Rather, I see some things that have come out within the collective that weren't there before, that are negative, that are destructive. And we need to have more conscious discussions about the different shifts that are taking place, how we protect ourselves in mind, body, and spirit, and prevent ourselves from becoming infected.
So if it can be used against us, can we use it to our advantage? And if so, how do we do that?
Right. Well, I'll just drop some clues that I've mentioned before that relate to collective synchronization of meditations during geomagnetic storms. And so Burl Payne has written a number of PDFs about this, where he tested the results of certain things. At that time in the 70s, they were trying to change the position of a spacecraft, of a satellite rather, that had lost its orbit and was coming back into the Earth's atmosphere. Now, they didn't succeed at that experiment, and he was mocked for it, but some would argue that there is the power of the collective that in some circumstances may be able to affect a certain outcome. For example, in Coast to Coast AM, there's been a number of shows where they have investigated that idea, and I think that there is power in that. And one thing that I documented in something I wrote was that there is a history of some towns in the United States during periods in which They may have come under attack, like from Indian forces, for example. One small town in Colorado was being attacked, according to their legend, by a particular Native American group, and they visualized, if you will, some sort of a protective guardian angel that, according to legend, protected that town from invasion by scaring the invading Indians. And the idea that I got hearing that, and other stories from Dion Fortune, who was somewhat of a spiritualist, who in the UK during 1940s, she was engaged in spiritual protection rituals of a certain nature that were invoking archetypal imagery, like King Arthur and things of that nature, against what was coming out of Germany at that time. So this is somewhat legendary, the spiritual magical Battle of Britain. There's a PDF about that. And so the idea here, in which I find a potential clue to share with others, during periods in massive solar activity, a coordinated group of humans meditating a specific way, also specifically if they've already worked through their own darker selves and they're working for a higher purpose. Because this is not something that I have a lot of experience in, but I think that there are experiences and stories and legends throughout humankind of people coming together in prayer, is a better way to put it. And so if there are certain areas, say in the United States, that are being invaded by certain forces, or anywhere else, and a lot of their karma has been worked through, they don't have a lot of darkness or a dark cloud hovering around that region, they may fare better than another area that isn't preying, that in fact is probably preying on their own members of society. And I see a dark direction that the Archons are trying to take our own world by teaching people these types of backstabbing ways of treating each other. It's like lowering the hand of protection, one could say. So I'm not religious at all, but I believe in God and something like a hand of protection. Certain actions and certain frequencies and thoughts from the collective can either raise that or lower that over time. And we're kind of looking at a situation now to where it seems that morality is going through a certain type of collapse first, before other types of dangers. So collectively, there could be a number of things that people can do for each other, like prayer, mutual prayer, certain types of clearing practices that are very personal, that deal with grounding and other things I think are more powerful during periods of geomagnetic storms, just naturally, because of the way the energy is running through our systems or our chakras. So people may be getting an extra boost in releasing certain things. I think that's a mindful way to deal with these solar blasts. Instead of having an emotional meltdown, people that are conscious of this could be using those for clearing periods. And again, when I look at the world and what's in the newswire, I see more people partying and getting involved in conflict because of all that surplus of energy. So it's a matter of redirecting it. And collective synchronization and the power of collective intent is still somewhat of an area in which there's uncharted territories. So people could be organizing that are of a higher level of frequency that are not involved. We're trying to dabble in black magic, not attempting to influence other people's minds, but trying to do things of a more positive nature. I don't know of a lot of groups out there that are doing those things, but we live in the day and age where technology is capable of measuring results. So there's a number of different things that people can do to attempt to measure results and improve the data that may come across shows like this. They may have their own labs. They may have their own controlled settings. The Caltech University study recently did prove that there is a correlation between changes in the magnetic fields of a room and changes in the brainwave state. And so this is probably one of the most detailed admissions scientifically that there are causal factors between magnetic fields and human brain waves, human brain cells.
So that would also be a good way. Let's say somebody is listening to this. It's the first time they came across this information, and that would also be a way to protect themselves. Clear.
I think there's a direct connection. we have an auric field around us,
Mm-hmm.
and that is its own electromagnetic field. And it's also important that we maintain that through various practices people can find online or visualizations to maintain that shield of protection. There's a lot of information online that would require even more time, but people can ground their energy to the center of the earth. And it's really as above, so below, bringing in both energies. And there's a lot of online classes that teach those things. Yeah, I would recommend taking those things seriously when we go through these high energy periods. Otherwise, people can get sucked into the undertow of emotions and other unresolved things. You know, I think in general, we become more sensitive. Some might say psychic, some might say clairvoyant. I think there's an increase in deep dreams and visions during these periods. And so, you know, they may not be consciously aware of it, but stuff's going to be coming up. That's why it's very helpful to have websites now like the, you know, spaceweather.gov and .com, so they can see in real time if something's going on, they can get an update on their phone. And so in this modern day and age, I'm not really aware of people synchronizing meditations to sunspots. I'm not aware. I'm aware that there may be evidence of this being common in our ancient past. You know, I'm aware that Burrow Payne has attempted some studies in the late 70s, you know, to try to see some measurable effect, and others. But I'm not really aware of it being done on a massive scale today. And this would be the time for people to consider certain experiments to see what the mind is really capable of. When people are focused on something or a collective meditation that's focused on a certain outcome. But ultimately, my concern is that this technology or this ability is understood by the social engineers. This is why we're hit with certain types of mind control and propaganda to direct human behavior and thought during sunspots, because it's already out there. They're already aware of how we're creating our reality through our thoughts, through these high energy periods. And so there's always this big attempt to co-opt our soul, basically, it seems, when we go through these solar blasts and solar cycles. So it's like we're having spiritual experiences on one hand and awakenings. On the other hand, we could be dealing with more interference, because I believe that this energy, the solar energy, might also be activating again the paranormal disturbances, which are coexisting along with us trying to evolve beyond this type of a reality. So essentially, we're dealing with periods in which the veil is thinner. You know, perception is tapping into that other dimension. And so to me, it's fairly critical for this awareness to come about, that we're not alone in this universe. And there could be periods. This is difficult still for me to explain, you know, but I'm working with only so much information about the sun on a planet that only recognizes so many studies about the causal factors. And so a lot of this is left to be honest, into intuition. Imagine how we're perceiving this, but we're definitely not separated from the effects of the sun. I believe that we are absolutely synchronized physiologically down to behavior on the cellular level. And this is just before its time. This is information that clearly is known by that whichever controls us, in my opinion. And so we're dealing with things and forces that understand humans more than humans understand themselves. The power of imagination is very real.
Yeah.
And ultimately, we're capable of changing our reality to a certain degree, but within a certain framework. So we're still going to be here on Earth dealing with certain systems of control, but there's certain things that we can change if we were to will ourselves to try to make that change amongst ourselves. So certain periods, the energy is going to be more conducive to some of those groups forming and connecting with other groups, maybe people breaking off, new societies, new political parties, even though I'm not very political, but new understandings that are operating outside of the groupthink. So this is a time in the next couple of years that some of the new shifts in social directions, I would expect to see those things start. 2020, 2021, 2022. But people going in new directions, having that energy, having that passion. But oftentimes, oftentimes that energy is co-opted towards something political, or like I said before, pop culture, some sort of new song, some sort of new fad. It's not always the result of a conspiracy. It's just the result sometimes of collective behavior that people move kind of together with others. So yeah, there's probably going to be a lot more knowledge about these things in 10 years, granted that we're still around then, but we're going to see the effect of the last solar cycle as we move into solar cycle 25.
So now when we throw in 5G into this mix, will that intensify everything, or would you say that does not have any effect?
Right. Well, I'm just giving my opinion on it. 5G
Yeah, sure.
is something that I've touched or studied, so I can only give my best guess. I mean, it's something that I believe is going to jam our intuition and signal, but this relates to this morphogenetic field. We're connected to a field around the planet. It's more about interrupting that connection to the field. So many critics of 5G don't talk about our natural connection to the field and the solar cycles. So it's more than just 5G being this conspiracy. It's about what it's taking us away from. I mean, I'm very concerned about the technology all being integrated to target truth speakers and researchers, to be quite frank. What I see coming is incredibly dystopian, more so than where anyone takes it. But we're living in a day and age where it's happening, where people are being taken over by the technology, and it's being weaponized to silence people, literally. It looks pretty bad. And so, you know, all I know is that I've been trying to live off grid for a while, and I've been mocked for it. There is a lot of that type of stereotyping going on, why people would want to live outside the city. I don't know why people are like that when they're now looking at news about 5G. It should all make sense. It should all make crystal clear sense. And I felt intuitively years ago, get away from the grid, get away from these dense, but something's going to be changing within them. So everything that I see in the news is just confirming, like, there's a reason why years ago I wanted to get away from being these places. It doesn't mean that, you know, there aren't challenges out here, or that 5G won't reach us out here and influence people online here. It's just getting away from super populated places where people are not getting prepared. They're not growing their own food. They're in political chaos mode. And for people that are independent politically, I mean, it's not a very friendly place for people like me. It's either pick a side or be considered this. It's so when I think about the idea of the solar flares in the future becoming something that disrupts our powerful grid, well, you know, that would be affecting 5G as well. So we may have a destiny potentially for humanity to come under some sort of technological control, or almost, and then for there to be some sort of divine intervention. I think it could be likened to that. If 5G would be working with a robotic apocalypse, I would think in some way, shape, or form. It's designed to be super fast for machines to be communicating with each other back and forth. Many people have been talking about the chemtrail agenda as well in conjunction with this, to ultimately decimate human life. So there's a lot of hope that I think that I have potentially in these future solar cycles disrupting all of this technology. You know, I almost see it as something that's almost science fiction, like it's all tied up in a central grid, but it can only last in an environment with a certain level of energy or frequency. So I think a lot of people may be overlooking the potential of the solar cycles of the near future or after that, because I don't think that we're going to be saved by the solar cycles soon. I think that it's more than likely we're going to experience this type of transhumanistic reality, because there's a level of karma that humanity has. Like it or not, it's scary. We all are here for a reason from actions of the past. So I think that the purpose in waking up is to try not to come back here, because the future of the earth beyond a certain point, you know, does look very much like the Matrix. You know, people talk about like the future of the Earth, but sometimes don't go beyond 2030. You know, I think about a plan that they may have for 2100, where certain countries and regions no longer have those people there anymore. Because ultimately, I see the Archons behind the race war theologies that have turned a lot of people against certain people under anti-themism. It's horrifying. Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to get their way, but ultimately, there is a reason why all of us were born. We need to rise above our circumstances. So there is something about this place that's a soul prison. So there are souls coming in and out of this planet. The solar cycles, I just want to add, I mean, I think that it's connected to the energy of these coronal mass ejections. Seems to be the same energy that souls come from, a soul connection between us and the sun. Now, that's something that may be perceived as going beyond certain people's religious notions, but some would argue that it doesn't, that there's plenty of actual references to the light in many religious texts around the world. So this has been forgotten in our day and age. So I think there's something to that. The increase in solar activity and increase in earthbound souls. And there could even be souls that are graduating from the underworld that have an opportunity to develop a full soul. And maybe that is required to evolve beyond this planet, to evolve to a point of having a full soul and learning certain lessons. A lot of people alive today don't seem to be aware of that. The golden rule, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Instead, I see a technological machine that wants to take that away and wants to bury the truth of people that would say that and warn people, hey, don't use the internet just for fame and fortune and getting behind a political thing because it'll make you money. So I think that there's a big entrapment taking place of souls to bind them to this type of reality. So true evolution and spiritually waking up, I mean, it's not as, one has to discover what that means for themselves, you know, or they can find themselves waking up for a number of years, then falling back and re-entering into that greedy psychology. Yeah, we talked about it already, that right now in our Earth history, many humans are being groomed for this domestic conflict that actually doesn't need to happen. And in many cases, wouldn't even be an organized conflict. It's just random violence, something like a Royal Rumble, like something off of, you know, having a bunch of wrestlers 30-1 and this type of madness where everybody's throwing each other every which way. That's pretty much the way it's designed. There's no real definitive lines in this upcoming conflict. People that can simply be targeted or targeted. Yeah, so we're definitely in darker periods socially than any other time in human history, in my opinion. We're hopefully going to see some rebound, but right now we're in some sort of a descent into something, and there's an unknown future ahead in the coming years. You know, things don't have to go in the direction like I have kind of been concerned that they would, like World War III, China versus the West. Things could go in a certain direction, completely different. But I'm not seeing a society on that path, you know, yeah. There's a lot of co-opting. And so I'm trying to let go and let God, as they say. It's beyond my control, really. We're just here to share information and try to evolve ourselves beyond the situation. Certain rules of thumb also: don't get involved in the drama between certain feuds that are going on. And there's many ways in which we can step away from that. So there's a lot of room for growth and stepping away from the collective thought forms that are out there to pull us in, regardless of our ethnicity or our nationality. I mean, there's so many different programs for so many different types of humans that are all based in the same thing.
When I listen to that, it sounds a little bit as if, yeah, for lack of a better term, it's a fight between darkness and light, and we are picking our sides.
You know, and I suspect that the solar cycles bring out those energies, the hero versus the Archonic system. And a lot of these things are built into pop culture as well, some of these Gnostic themes, but I think that it's being reawakened in the collective consciousness. to kind of meet this threat that we're facing, it is there. It also comes under attack too. But I think that it comes from somewhere, this collective imagination that at times is not the result of a conspiracy, but certain movies and ideas in pop culture that's there representing that collective knowing. It's happening within us. And so the real battle is within, over our lower senses. You know, and it's going to maybe take me a while to really articulate this as far as I'd like to. You know, I've been at this a while, but what I've come to learn is, yeah, the desires and the lower thoughts and things like that are more self-destructive than some of the physical foes that we face, because ultimately we're trying to evolve our own souls in this world, and there's countless propaganda outlets that keep us in this limited sense of self, constantly creating enemies and boogeymen. So it's built in within our own matrix. And you know, there's people being victimized all the time, that society could do something to try to alleviate that suffering. And in many cases, society hasn't really passed that test. So that's why I believe we're trying to evolve beyond this type of a world entirely. We could really be looking at a world that will continue to descend into a certain direction, where coming back in this type of a world is not necessarily a good thing. You know, maybe it would be for some people with a better situation or position to be able to make things right. You know, so maybe there is another form of evolution beyond human that may be more, for lack of a better word, angelic, that is there to help humanity in a more capable way other than just being in flesh. You know, so in my imagination, there may be a number of different places for us to evolve beyond human before we evolve beyond this type of a world. So there is a deeper battle of good and evil taking place amongst the humans. That does seem to be apparent. So some humans may seem to be on the surface level cursed with bad luck. They may be experiencing those things to be forged into something powerful. On the other hand, other people may seem blessed with material possessions and money and popularity. Definitely a lot of that. And that may be more or less the co-opt of their soul to this world, to false values and things. And they may not realize that till they're older, or they may not at all. And so, you know, things are not as they seem when it comes to, you know, our financial situation, our social status situation. And now we know with China and the social status, social control rating, the credit rating, and thus a person's life being affected by that. Why does YouTube seem to be a mere reflection of that? I would say that the YouTube algorithm is a mere reflection of the China social credit rating system. And we're seeing it now in the speakers and ideas that it may promote to the top, you know, and the more truthful bits of information that people are going to have to dig for on the internet to find.
Yeah. You are probably familiar with that. We have this map that shows an X over the United States that these solar eclipses make. And there is a lot of gloom and doom talk about, oh, here the X, the spot is marked, the USA are going down. Yeah, I hear that, like, I don't know, for the last 10 years at least. The USA are going down, they are going down. And now the US will be marked by 2 solar eclipses. Fear
Right.
porn?
Well, I'm aware of that map, and there is something coming in 2024, right over a certain part of the United States where X marks the spot. And that's also going to be in the period in which we're in the solar maxima. So, you know, I think that's likely that we're going to see a lot of things begin after 2021. Hopefully not. But what may be occurring soon with China, I think we're going to see a lot of 2021. Now, obviously, that's going to be impacting long-term whatever happens in the United States. And Earth changes with the next solar cycle, right? There could be a direct correlation between the two. There's a lot of concern about the Madrid fault. And I noticed that there are cycles of what I call catastrophobia, where people are freaked out, wigged out the most about the Earth changes, and they may not know about the cycles a lot of people tend to talk about things like it's all one linear trajectory. And yes, we are in a particular crash course with a certain reality, but life still goes through cycles, ups and downs. So it does seem like that's a very volatile period, 2024, certainly, right? As I've been saying, it's also a period where someone could be strategically removed from certain dangerous areas and having a spiritual experience somewhere else. Not that relocation is needed. I often, though, think about places that may be safer, in the United States where they're not dealing with a bunch of looting and rioting, that if we are dealing with those major eclipse energies that are historic, mind-blowing, that we're not distracted by maybe a need to defend ourselves or this other thing, but we're in, because I believe that we are capable of deep, profound transformation and awareness. And I don't take it too far, but we're much more capable than what we're expressing. So, I think that someone could look at what's coming and choose to plan their lives accordingly, to be away from the chaos, whether it's going to be off the grid or maybe just somewhere else in the United States or in Europe or in the world. They may have the intuition to realize, okay, if everybody's going to be super emotional in this particular area, in this particular region, there could be trouble. There could be a resource depletion issue. If there is some major crop loss from the solar minimum that we're in right now, that can lead to even greater problems economically in the early 2020s. Things like that, looking at certain formulas. But I have no definitive prediction regarding a specific thing. But we could also bring in the fact that we're facing increased meteor strikes. We're already seeing reports of small ones hitting the Earth's atmosphere. They reported July 22nd that there was some sort of light impact. There was also another report that suggested something hit the atmosphere over Arizona. So as we look at a conjunction of events, a weakening magnetic field, we could see the potential, more than likely, of one of these near-Earth asteroids making impact. Or other unknown, unseen, other influences of these asteroids that we may not be, whether it be psychological effect. So there could be a period in the future, hopefully not, where a bunch of people go into war fever and they start going after a certain group, or there's a big event that happens in the nation that leads to something super tyrannical or draconian that leads people to go in the 2040s and 2050s. What in the hell happened to those people? Well, we may be able to look at these solar and eclipse effects. It's a phenomena, but we're clearly affected. So I think that we're going to be challenged by that darker side of our human consciousness. That's what I think that we're coming up against. We're coming up against a climax of energies. And I don't know if it is really about one triumphing over the other. Maybe within ourselves, we are attempting to triumph above our lower selves. And actually, in order to do that, we have to put in some serious work. So again, I think that's where the real effort is, that we need to really focus on. But we're going to see these massive disturbances, I think, in the world that are going to be synchronized potentially with this 2024 period, 2025. A lot of people are focused on 2030 with regards to the overall decline of the solar cycle from a certain perspective. Things could still change with the sun. But regardless of that, 2025 seems to be that period of the most solar energy, again, before this decline, again, which some people are predicting to be an ice age or something else. We can also go into an ice age from certain events that occur through certain volcanic eruptions. Obviously, Yellowstone would be one of those things. So during the deep solar minimum, with the increase in cosmic rays, certain types of eruptions are more possible if this is indeed the time for that type of release of energy that could thrust us back into some sort of ice age event. At this point, I'm just being in acceptance of whatever comes, as far as certain events. My greatest concern ultimately has been the stability of the United States after the 2020s. And being very concerned that our government is really, in reality, working with other governments to weaken us by design. leaving the back door ultimately in, as they've given China technology for multiple decades. I'm seeing now all these reports that are coming out that are just validating a decade of concern that China has had a certain technological advance in certain ways, and that it's not an accident that we're seeing this Google China connection. And now we're looking at China and its prisons, what it's doing to certain people, 1 million people put in camps. And so these are warnings that the United States should be taking. People don't have to fall into total fear, but they should rise above this type of internal divide when they see these types of actions. So that's what has me concerned. And at the same time, these massive earth changes could trigger other geopolitical catastrophes. For example, if there was massive flooding on the west coast of the United States, or certain other types of tilting of the planet, the geopolitical game changes overnight, with naval ships and other things being able to easily access. So it's like when people look at certain scenarios, they are scenarios that can trigger other events that they may think are totally impossible or implausible. So ultimately, nowhere is perfectly safe, in my opinion. But there are areas that are just more at risk because they're near the coastline, because they could be military targets and military bases. There are areas that we can clearly see, but there's no point in looking forever for the perfectly safe place, because whatever's coming is going to stress everybody out when it comes to resources. How do people function without money, without technology? People are not prepared for that anywhere. So the best hope that I think people have is their guardian angels or the creator itself being able to relocate people to what is actually the right place for them. We may think that certain places are the best place for us, but we don't really know till things actually happen. So I think that there is place for, a deep faith in the creator outside of religion that people turn towards in a time of crisis that leads them. Because right now we're in a time of great deception where people are being led in all different types of directions. Buy now, buy all this food, get this big survival shelter. And, I've come across certain types of psychologies over the years by being online. And I know that those psychologies haven't helped me out personally. That's not really about that. It's not about the stuff at all. That there is something deeper that works behind the scenes that's involved in miracles, that's involved in divine intervention, that can stop threats before they manifest. A lot of people could benefit from really challenging how they viewed our reality, how they view karma, how they view why they're here.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, I totally agree that there is a lot of inner work to do. But I also see that not many people are aware of this. It's not the majority. And even among those who comprehend the concept, the percentage of those who are actually doing it is even lesser. So what is going on here? Are we being divided?
We are being divided. Now, with regards to the cycle influence, there's periods where we might be more tapped in and other periods in which we're less tapped in. And then our genetics and other factors may play subtle roles in how sensitive we are, like the development of our brains or things like that. So we respond to these things in different ways. It's also relative, of course, what is spiritual and what is not. We may come to maybe some consensus agreements on some things that are more conscious behaviors and then things that are less conscious, and then trying to measure a society getting worse or getting better. And is it even that easy to I try to be respectful to the belief systems of others, but a lot of these mainstream spiritual movements are very much worshiping the material plane and overlooking explanations, even spiritual explanations why we're still dealing with this military industrial complex that's killing so many people, and being accountable for many people have been saying they've been channeling certain groups, certain federations of light that have made certain promises and even endorsed certain politicians. And I've witnessed for years this type of parroting. So we really would need to be not just reversing course on that, but people moving forward with, I wouldn't necessarily say that we're channeling, but there may be some that are tapping into spirit. But oftentimes it's about tapping into that truth within us, not seeking out ascended masters and things of that nature. Certain things to me would come across as a shift in consciousness where people take more risks, speaking their own truth about those things regardless of the repercussions, and not trying to fall into a certain box or to please an algorithm. And there may be people doing that in certain numbers, but it's not quite the critical mass that we need. So the deeper spiritual, I guess, work that's done is inner work. It may manifest in the physical, but we're not always going to be aware of it when it's taking place in others, nor are others really going to be aware of it when it's taking place in us. What I've realized is when someone goes really independent and challenges certain paradigms, it's going to piss some people off. And so the way that society treats our information or ideas may not be the right measuring stick when it comes to, is the information becoming more spiritual or not? It may be rejected by more people as it gets more real. There's a lot of things that are very reactional with regards to just independent research in general, mainstream media, conspiracy theories. Oftentimes the dark side of that easily just makes an enemy out of a certain group to make sense out of why someone else is enslaved. And that's not really waking up. That's actually kind of like an atypical personality type. So we need to evolve beyond that to understanding why we're in this type of a reality. Yeah, but I don't know if it's actually going to get easier. And so what I think that we're here to do is learning to evolve with the interference that comes, and that some of those things that come are there to help us evolve even more, to separating from our lower selves or the material plane. So there is a spiritual ascension that I believe is real. But what that means and what that entails is a very spiritual experience. It doesn't include being saved by ETs. And those things seem to be implants that they interjected into our world to confuse people. So when people start looking for evolution or spiritual ascension, that they end up co-opted by these belief systems.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much the path that we're on right now, is breaking free each year from whatever programs and belief systems that were there before. I mean, for me, in the end, the greatest concern that I've had is leaving the world without the key things that I want to express being expressed in the right medium, like a book or something that I would like to evolve upwards to in the future beyond YouTube, and expressing some of these ideas, maybe even multiple languages. And to me, that's a greater way to leave the world as opposed to a certain type of materialism or a certain number of family members. And I'm not here to put down others, but there is like that blueprint that we're just here to make more of us, make more of us, make more of us, continue to continue. And so there's a higher conscious version of what we're doing here, occupying biology. Then there's this other version that is on autopilot. So it's up to each man and woman, wherever they are, to be able to distinguish between the two. I've started to figure out what it is for me in recent years. There's definitely options in our lives where we could have gone in two different directions or in another path.
Yeah.
And so in a way, we're breaking free from the collective is the biggest thing that most of us are doing in this lifetime.
When you said that it's not going to be that ETs are going to save us, I have to say, whenever I smell a savior program, I run into the other direction. I'm out of there immediately.
Yeah, and it can be lonely to step away from that mentality. Some people may feel hopeless, but if we are the ones we've been waiting for, and if we've been transported here to become an even powerful spirit, then that's where we need to focus our intention and awareness. And that's not the same thing as declaring ourselves gods and goddesses. There is this middle way of not necessarily going to a certain direction. Now, some people do that, and some people are developing these complexes, and I'm not here necessarily to knock that either, but I'm not even taking it that far. We're a long ways away from that type of status. I would think that
I
we would
don't
be
even
expressing
want that
ourselves in a much
status.
more right. So there is a middle way, and we should pursue that. But yeah, we shouldn't necessarily want that type of a status, because if we fall into that psychology, then maybe we're not evolving beyond this type of a world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of those gods and goddesses, to me, they are, yeah, let's say lower astral. It's another trap, another deception, and there is nothing to worship there. So I'm not a huge fan of any gods and goddesses. I'm not very impressed there. And that is why I do not want to have.
And the program comes in different ways at different times. So certain political memes may come out about the chosen one, things like that. The reason why some things strike a chord is because of something in that collective, in the collective consciousness, the collective memory. It's there, of one group being duped against the other, one being chosen and the other not
Kicked
being
in the
chosen.
ass.
It's a part of this world. It's a part of the lower world, this type of earth realm. So yeah, certain buzzwords come around that can captivate people. Yeah, my hope is that some people that have been duped into the elements of some of the New Age thought really take responsibility for their own need to apply the law of attraction to speaking up for people that have no one to speak for them, shine the light on certain issues. And that's not the same thing as giving the dark force power. I think giving it power is just being silent about what it's doing. So we have a lot more room to evolve as communicators, spirits in human form.
Yeah.
And so YouTube really is a precursor to maybe even another genetic leap or consciousness leap. We don't know, but we do know that it was brand new, dropped in our lap 15 years ago. And that one could say that there's been a cosmic test over what we would do with this technology for those that chose to open up accounts and be their own media, right? People have been given enough rope to hang themselves spiritually, enough money, in fact. And so this whole YouTube thing, actually behind the scenes, one could be shown in the spirit what it was all about, as well as our access to the internet, what we would do in the Western world with our speech, whether people would gang up and develop these types of dark thought patterns that would further victimize certain people, or whether they would use it to make the world a better place. So I think ultimately we do have that type of test that is ongoing each and every day that we speak to others through these platforms.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful final words. Alex, you have to come back.
Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully this will be a good introduction then to some of these ideas, and then we can come back with more information.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I think we covered a lot of ground today. And yeah, it might be new and not very comfortable, but it is certainly worth exploring it.
Well, I appreciated it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Yes, this was it. Night Flight for today. Take good care of yourself. Stay safe and sound. Bye-bye.